Hello and a warm welcome to today's webinar, Activity Options for Action Plans for Brominated, Chlorinated and Other New POPs, hosted by the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership under the Global Environment Facility Global NIP Update Project. I'm Hannes McNulty, Industry and Value Chains Lead with the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, or GGKP for short, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. This webinar is part of the training activities delivered by GGKP under the Global Environment Facility funded, UNEP-led project Global Development Review and Update of National Implementation Plans under the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which is a very long name. So hereinafter, we'll simply refer to it as the Global NIP Update Project. As part of our ongoing knowledge sharing initiatives, and as the third event in our NIPS Action Plan webinar series, this session aims to introduce the action plan options, focusing on brominated, chlorinated, and other newly listed POPs. My colleague Suman will be adding details in the chat for the previous two webinars so that you have information on those as well. Today, our expert speakers will be introducing the integrated approach to reducing and eliminating POPs plastic additives, in particular listed brominated flame retardants, chlorinated flame retardants, and UV 328 across major use sectors, including new and waste electrical and electronic equipment, transport and end-of-life vehicles, and buildings and construction waste. The speakers will also be presenting action plan options that take into account life cycle approaches covering waste management and the recycling of the aforementioned three large waste and resource recovery sectors. You'll also learn about activity options on managing and phasing out SCCPs and MCCPs in the major use sectors. I would just then like to make some simple housekeeping remarks. As you might be aware, as always, our webinar will be conducted in English and it's recorded. However, this event is also supported with interpretation into French, Spanish, and Russian languages. You can select your language in the bottom of the screen. This event is technically facilitated by my colleague Suman, who will also be gathering together your questions in the chat. Please also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, as it's a great opportunity to meet all of your colleagues from all over the world. Now, normally we were going to have a welcome remark from Katarzyna Szebkova. Unfortunately, she hasn't. Katarzyna has just arrived, as I see, so I'm delighted to be able to introduce her. Katarzyna is the director of the National Center for Toxic Compounds and of the Stockholm Convention Regional Center in the Czech Republic. Her very extensive range of work includes cooperation with Czech and international stakeholders, teaching, training, and supporting policy science communication and application of science and practice. With a degree and PhD in chemistry, Katarzyna previously also worked as a chemical expert and international negotiator for the Czech Ministry of Environment in Chemicals Management at both EU and UN levels. So Katarzyna, even though there's so much more we could say about your incredible experience, I know you're a bit stuck for time, and so I would be delighted to hand over to you for some opening and welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Hannes, for a very nice introduction, and thank you for invitation to provide opening remarks to colleagues and participants in this webinar of the GGKP. I think my role today is basically tell you what, and as Roland and Alexander will then provide some ideas what can action plan comprise. I would also like to draw your attention to a little analysis that my colleagues and me were making during the process of supporting 7 countries in preparing their updated national implementation plan. When looking at the performed inventories for brominated flame retardants, we actually thought there would be great similarities in our regions, in our countries that we have in the Balkan and in Caucasian region, But in fact, it didn't seem to be so. So we have written a brief communication piece that is featured currently on our website, and I believe it was also shared with GGKP. If you want, I can also show the link in the chat that is trying to make the comparison. And the reason why I think there are great differences is actually linked to the market network and where are your suppliers of important materials for transport sector, for construction sector, and so on. And it seems to be that within the countries on the Balkan Peninsula, the more significant impact that, at least what we've discovered for brominated flame retardants, seems to be rather in the construction sector, while on the Caucasian region, it looks like the issue is more within the transport sector rather than in the construction sector. So those are interesting differences that you may find out and then you may read for yourself. But what I can say also from the experience of already 3 of our countries that we support have already finalized the work and prepared their updated NIP, and we already had a couple of NIP endorsement meetings. It is really, really very important to come back once you perform the analysis and finalize the inventory, because from the inventory itself, very often the action plans emerge. And it is also very important to have, during the validation of inventories workshop, to also try to look at the consolidation, have a helicopter view, and try to compare chemicals that are in the same group. Are there any similarities? Are there any issues regarding the data flow? Are there any issues with which impact it will make on waste management? Is it a delayed action or can it be an immediate action? And I think we considered all that. And one of the countries was so successful that they actually were able to complete almost all identified actions for action plans even before they finalized their updated NIP. So I think we now need to look for a bit longer term actions that need more systematic view. So I wanted to provide you with this short introduction. I hope you would find our communication piece useful, and I wish you all a great success in this webinar. And I do apologize, I cannot stay with you all the time because unfortunately I have another conflicting meeting that starts in a couple of minutes. So thank you very much for inviting me, and back to you, Hannes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really much appreciated that you were able to take this time to introduce Katarzyna. So much appreciated, and thank you again. And now we can actually go to our first session with our expert speaker, Roland Weber. Roland has over 25 years experience researching persistent organic pollutants, and for the last 15 years or so has been a UN consultant on the implementation of the Stockholm Convention. In addition to having extensive experience on POPs, he's also a drafter of Stockholm Convention guidance documents, a member of the UNEP dioxin toolkit and BATBEP group, and has an assignment at the University of Beijing for the Stockholm Convention Regional Center for Asia Pacific. Now, Roland, just before I hand over to you, I just want to remind the participants that we have a chat, and I see that you're already very, very active in it. And this is the place to post any questions you have for Roland during his presentation. We'll see if we are able to pull out 1 or 2 of those questions to pose to him after his interventions, but of course we'll be also keeping them for the Q&A. So please be active in the chat, post your questions, and we'll make sure to collect them. And with that, Roland, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannes, for the kind introduction. Also to Katka for her considerations and remarks. Good day to everybody. Our first presentation is on some basic considerations on action plan development and integrated approach. tailored to the action plans we will have a look today. When we look to the 37 POPs listed in the Stockholm Convention, we see that many of the new listed POPs are actually plastic additives or otherwise related to polymers. We have now 5 brominated flame retardants here marked in brown. 3 are chlorinated flame
Roland,
retardants.
just very briefly, you don't seem to be sharing your screen anymore. Maybe you could just reshare it if you don't mind.
No, okay.
Yeah, we don't see it at the moment.
Can you see it now?
Yes, it's coming. Yes, we see it. You can go into full screen mode. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so
Perfect.
many of the new listed POPs are plastic additives or otherwise related to polymers. 5 are brominated flame retardants, 3 are chlorinated flame retardants, and we have 4 fluorinated PFAS groups, which are used in sidechain fluoropolymers. And also we have a first non-halogenated plastic additive, the UV stabilizer UV328, which has been listed more recently in 2023. Some of these POPs had very high production volumes, including the decabromo-diphenyl ethers, hexabromocyclododecan, and especially the short-chain and medium-chain chlorinated paraffins. And all of them have received exemptions for production and use, at least until recently, or are still continued the production. And when we look to the POP review committee, we have at the moment the brominated and the brominated chlorinated dioxins there. And the brominated are here especially linked to the brominated flame retardants. When you look to the current situation of the environment in the world, the science community have developed the planetary boundaries and did an assessment. So the planetary boundaries, they define the environmental limits within which humanity can safely operate, and they have been evaluated for 9 critical anthropogenic pressures on the Earth systems, and 7 of them have in 2025 already crossed planetary boundaries and are of concern. This includes biodiversity and climate change, but also several studies concluded that now these novel entities, and they include chemicals of concern like PFAS and the plastic pollution, have crossed planetary boundaries and are therefore of high concern for humanity and a risk for several ecosystem services. Therefore, also the United Nations highlights that humanity faces a triple planetary crisis, including climate change and nature biodiversity loss, and as a third, also chemical pollution and waste. And there are interlinkages between chemicals and waste and other drivers of the triple planetary crisis. There is a strong link between chemicals and waste and climate change. For example, open burning of waste and plastics, or management of plastic foams containing POPs, but at the same time F-gases, which are greenhouse gases, or plastic recycling, which is a kind of positive impact. If you recycle plastic, it has a reduced carbon footprint compared to new plastics. Also, chemicals in plastics are a cause for biodiversity loss. For example, reduce reproduction of predators at the top of the food chain. And when we look to plastic, we see that in the marine environment, we have deaths because of plastic pollution, especially from the macroplastics. So here, Inga Andersen, the director of UNEP, highlighted that the toxic trail of economic growth, pollution and waste results every year in premature death of millions of people across the world. And one major reason for that is that the linear material economy is resulting here in a global plastic nightmare. It's a nightmare in our oceans, but also a similar nightmare on land, especially in developing countries. Here are some pictures from Asian countries. And municipal plastic and waste generation and management is an overall key problem here for environmental pollution and also resource losses, in particular in low and middle income countries. It's a large cost factor for municipal budgets. And plastic waste is expected, unfortunately, to increase strongly with increasing population and increasing GDP. POPs and chemicals of concern. Plastic additives increase here the pollution and also the cost for management. So therefore, we need to go to a more circular economy. All UN organizations agree on this, the GEF or the European Union. But when we move here to a more circular economy, we need to take care in the recycling that we don't pollute the new products with POPs and other hazardous chemicals. So therefore, POPs and other hazardous chemicals need to be controlled and phased out, best within a global approach, like the BRS conventions and the upcoming plastic treaty. And when we look now to the major plastic and the POPs, we see that the share of industrial POPs are especially included in electronics, transport, and building and construction sector, and that most of the POPs are contained there in plastics and other polymers. These make a relevant share of the overall stock of plastic worldwide. Approximately 30% of plastic production is used in these three sectors, even a bit more. But when we consider the long service life in the three sectors, likely more than 50% of all plastic stocks are contained in these three sectors today and are therefore highly relevant for plastic management and recycling. Additionally, we have the textile sector, which is the third largest user of plastic. Also, plastic partly contain POPs, and therefore, when we add to this, we are far above 40% of the global plastic use. And a large range of POPs are included in these three sectors, and especially the plastic additives. You see here the brominated flame retardants, the Dechlorine Plus and UV328 are mainly included in these three sectors and therefore can be addressed and managed and phased out to a large extent by addressing these three sectors. Also, SCCP and MCCP are relevant for these sectors, but we will hear at the fourth presentation that they are also relevant for other uses. So assessing and managing POPs in the major affected plastic use sectors can improve the management of plastic in these sectors and result in the depollution of these sectors. We have already good experience with the global phase out of hexabromocyclododecan in 2021. And it is likely that also all deca-bromodiphenyl ethers production have stopped around 2023. And the Stockholm Convention started already around 2011 to inventory and manage the POPs in these sectors, with further listing now with the Dechlorine Plus, UV328, SCCPs and MCCPs. This is further extended. So therefore, the POP management in these sectors require the management of the plastics. We cannot just manage the POPs in these sectors. So therefore, POP action plans and the implementation can become an excellent synergy with the upcoming plastic treaty. So for the recycling cycles, this means that in the action plans, we can look here to the recycling of plastics in construction and the management of POPs, the recycling of electronic waste plastics, and management of POPs, the transport sector, and also for textiles and textile recycling, which is just in its infancy. If we don't look here to the recycling, then we get the future products contaminated. Here you see some examples from recycling of plastic in new products where POPs have been found in studies here in Asia. Basically in all toys in China in 2009, POPs were found and other brominated flame retardants. Here, Miriam Diamond analyzed her kitchen tools in Canada and found high levels of brominated diphenyl ethers, and that's a study from Europe, from Czech Republic, where PBDEs were finally found here in these coffee cup lids. And you see from there you directly can get a direct exposure. So by this, we saw that the recycling flow of PBDs and other POP-containing plastics seemed largely uncontrolled, and we need a better life cycle management and a better control. So the Stockholm Convention Action Plan can play here a key role. The recycling sector needs considerable improvements, but BEP, best available techniques, best environmental practice, for separation of problematic materials, and we need to take care that they don't come into these sensitive uses. And therefore, the Global Stockholm Convention approach came here to the right time. Another thing which need to be noted for the NIP, that product sectors containing POP plastic additives can have very long service life. Yeah, this is for electronics, can go up to 30 years, vehicles even longer. And when we look here for the plastics in the construction, we are not talking about decades, but even this can go up to a century. So if these POPs in plastic are recycled, then even we will have longer impact from them. And therefore, it's very important that we act accordingly. And this already happens. This is a recycling facility from Austria for e-waste plastic. So here, the POP-containing plastic is separated from the non-POP containing plastic. Overall, around 40 to 70% of the plastic can here be recycled, and a high share can go back to new electronics. The action plan for POP and related plastics in these sectors can contribute to the environmental sound management and a safer circular economy here for plastic, which is an aim for the plastic treaty under development. Just a bit to the big numbers. When we look here to the electronics, we see what kind of big chance we have with addressing it. We have around 62 million tons of e-waste plastic in 2022. 25% of this is plastics. So overall, today we have globally every year 15.5 million tons of e-waste plastic per year. And appropriate management and treatment is needed. And here we have the Stockholm Convention, but BEP guidance for PBDEs and Dechlorant Plus, where such separations and management are well described. But there are more pollutants than only the POPs in these materials. Here for e-waste, especially, we have toxic metals like lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and antimony. And they make this to a hazardous waste stream overall. But at the same time, metals are also a driver for the management, and they are an opportunity for financing. The value of metals can partly finance V-plastic management. And if extended producer responsibility frames are appropriately set and implemented, then environmental sound management of e-waste could be financed. POP management in plastic could be an impulse here for the environmental sound management of e-waste plastic, and the action plans for POPs can support here in a systematic manner of other pollutants in e-waste. Because when we look here to the heavy metals, we see that from the total value of metals in e-waste, which in 2022 was $91 billion US, only 28 billion worth has been recycled, due to the lack of recycling rates. This means improved management and improved recycling is also a business opportunity. Similar for the transport sector. Today we have around 1.1 billion passenger cars, and these contain around 220 million tons of plastic. Considering an average lifetime of around 20 years, we have today around 11 million tons of plastic from end-of-life vehicles. So with the management of end-of-life vehicles, the plastic, POPs and other chemicals of concern need to be managed. But also here, the valuable metals, ferrous and non-ferrous metals, including precious metals, are recovered to a large extent, often by formal and informal recycling in low and middle income countries. But also here is a strong improvement potential. Today, plastic and synthetic textiles in end-of-life vehicles are often not recycled or recovered, but are frequently disposed of in landfills and dump sites or openly burned, leading to pollution. Considering that we need to move to a more circular economy and to a better recovery of resources, including also plastic parts from end-of-life vehicles need to be better reused and recycled. This is now required, for example, by the updated draft of the European End-of-Life Vehicle Directive, which is proposing that for new vehicles, 25% recycled plastic should be used in the plastic in new vehicles. And a good news is that there is a first project to recover end-of-life vehicle plastic in Africa, also then for the production in Europe, and that project is planned for Ghana. So when writing the action plans in the NIP, it can and should be linked to the larger frame of waste and plastic management and resource recovery, linking with general waste and resource management in the major affected sectors, linking with resource recovery towards a more circular economy, but also linking to poverty reduction and job creation and improvement of the working condition of especially the informal sector in low and middle income countries with gender considerations and protection of vulnerable population groups. The three main sectors for POP in plastic management, transport, electronics and buildings contain at the same time valuable resources, which should cover a part of the robust waste management. So there should not be cherry picking allowed. Together with extended producer responsibility, this can contribute to a decent income of the waste management sector. And we will have in this webinar another specific presentation on extended producer responsibility. The NIP update guidance stresses that we should do this integrated approach and that POP should not be addressed on their own, but should be linked and integrated with general chemical and waste and plastic management. And you see that these three sectors are especially interesting and appropriate for that. But also we should link to the broader issue of the global framework on chemicals and synergies. And also I will try to look into this in the action plan activities. So there are close links between POPs and the global framework on chemicals. First, on highly hazardous pesticides, that action plan we had in December. Here's the link to it. Also to the perfluorinated alkylated substances and the transition to safer alternatives. There's a strong link between Stockholm Convention and the Global Framework on Chemicals. And just on this Tuesday, we had a webinar. And also today, when we look chemicals in products and hazardous substances within the life cycle of electrical and electronic products, is a close link here to the Global Framework on Chemicals and the Stockholm Convention. Here, specific POP issues can or rather should be addressed with the larger frame of managing a wider group of POP-like and other hazardous substances with a science-based approach. When you look to your NIP and the NIP development and the NIP structure, you see that the action plans are recommended for Chapter 3. In Chapter 3 of the NIP, the recommendation from the guidance is to have a policy statement and then to have an implementation strategy. And this implementation strategy sector can be used to elaborate just this integrated approach, which I introduced here in these first slides. And then in Chapter 3.3 comes the activities and the strategies. And here you would list country-specific action plans, activities and strategies, including those required by the convention and designed to meet the convention obligation. When you look here to the structure and the NIP harmonized template, you see that for each action plan, We will identify objectives and goals and activities. This we will do in the current webinar. But when you look to the frame, there are also performance indicator, the time frame, the implementers, and the resources which you can add in the action plans. And in today's webinar, I will introduce on options for objectives and activities for action plans for plastic additives, including this brominated, chlorinated flame retardant, UV328, and consider this in a sectoral approach. Thank you for your attention. Are there already questions? Hannes? Zoom in.
Hannes, I cannot hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Roland, but Hannes was very...
Yeah, we
Okay.
cannot. I cannot hear Hannes either.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Then, then we can continue directly with the second presentation, and we will look then if there is already question related to that. So action plan consideration for management and control.
I have issues with my microphone. Yes, Roland, there's no more questions and we can continue with the next session.
Okay.
Sorry to everybody.
Thanks, Hannes. No, that's fine. Okay, good. So second presentation is on action plan considerations for management and control of POP plastic additives and related plastics and resources in major uses. I have introduced you that we have a wide range of POPs here in the three different sectors, which can be addressed just by these three sectors. We know that more than 50% of the plastic stocks are in these three sectors, and that the inventory and the right activity to manage POPs in these major affected plastic use sectors can improve the overall management of plastics in these sectors and result in depollution. So therefore, the action plans on POPs and their implementation can become an excellent synergy with the upcoming plastic treaty. The POP management in these sectors require anyway the overall management of these waste categories and the related plastics. And unfortunately, we do not have a plastic treaty yet, and it is not clear if it will become a strong treaty, including also chemicals. Yeah, so that's one of the discussion points in the plastic treaty. So for the time being, the Stockholm Convention and the Basel Convention can fill this gap with ambitious action plans, yeah, until we have a strong plastic treaty. When we look here to the three different sectors, finally, we need to separate the individual plastic types. Yeah, so plastic is not plastic, but we have many different type of plastics, which is one challenge in the recycling. And what you see here for the three different areas, building, construction, automotive, and electronics, the major plastic types which are used there. And in these different uses, I have tried to put with the red circle, let's say, those where POPs are prominent. Yeah. So you see here, for example, for polystyrene insulation foams, a large share of polystyrene insulation foams currently, of EPS and XPS foams currently in use worldwide, contain POPs. Yeah. On the other hand, when we look to automotive, the largest amount is polypropylene. And here for polypropylene, there are hardly POPs present. Yeah, so I can promise you that for the next 20 years, this kind of figure will be very interesting if you are dealing with plastic and plastic recycling. Yeah, because what is clear, when we do circular economy, we need to manage these POPs best within a global approach. And it's not only POPs. There are other chemicals of concern. And I have here an overview for the electronics on other chemicals of concern, which are kind of regulated by multilateral environmental agreements. For example, we have heavy metals, where until now only mercury is regulated. We have the climate gases, CFCs, HCFCs. We have asbestos, highlighted by the Rotterdam Convention, but we have further chemicals of concern. For example, like all aromatic brominated flame retardants are of concern. The European Chemical Agency is currently doing evaluation. I will come to it later. And there are also substitutes like the halogenated organophosphorus flame retardants, which substituted brominated flame retardants partly. They are also a concern and need to be addressed. And the topic of POPs is bigger than the 37 POPs listed. You see here an estimate from Professor Scheringer, which estimated that we have more than 570 potential POPs in the 100,000 chemicals which he analyzed. And therefore, for the improvement of the situation, chlorinated, brominated, and fluorinated persistent bioaccumulating toxic substances need to be managed and systematically substituted with green and sustainable alternatives. And this we can also consider in the action plan as an option. I would like to highlight here from the UN, there is this Green and Sustainable Chemistry Framework Manual, which might help you in the assessment of alternatives. But in addition to these persistent chemicals, there are other problematic plastic additives. So here for UNEP, we have done an assessment for the total amount of chemicals used in plastics. And at that time, in the report, Chemicals in Plastic, a technical report, we found that more than 13,000 chemicals are present in different ways in plastics, and around 3,200 of them we considered as hazardous chemicals with certain hazardous properties. There was just a new update of this assessment in 2025. So today it is estimated that more than 16,000 chemicals are related to plastic, 5,700 additives, 3,500 processing aids, and that more than 4,200 chemicals in plastics have some hazardous properties. So therefore, with our Stockholm Convention, when we address now brominated flame retardants or the fluorinated PFAS or the first UV light stabilizers, we need to know that when we go to the action plan, that we need to think bigger how to kind of control this large amount of hazardous chemicals. And the direct exposure risk from POPs overall in stored and transported plastic is relatively small. Yeah. So here, the management of these plastic containing POPs from this perspective is not as problematic compared to PCB or pesticides. Therefore, the waste plastic containing POPs need not necessarily to be categorized as hazardous waste. So, for example, in Germany, in our legislation, the hexabromo cyclododecan containing polystyrene foams are not considered hazardous waste, but just a POP containing waste which need to be managed in an environmental sound manner. And an aim of the Stockholm Convention but web guidance is here to separate POP containing plastics fractions for environmental sound management and to facilitate the recycling of non-impacted plastic materials. So therefore, an action plan for POP plastic additives should be a basis for environmental sound management of POP impacted plastics in the major affected sectors, the recycling and recovery of non-impacted plastics and polymer fractures in these sectors, and that recycled materials do not lead to exposure of recyclers and consumers. So also after separation, these plastic recyclates should not go into sensitive uses because the separation is never perfect. Support also the overall waste management and recycling of these major waste categories to prevent contaminated sites and possibly secure and remediate contaminated sites if they are already present. And here we will have some examples in the presentation. Good. Coming now to the first objectives, I always start in action plans with the regulatory framework. So here the objective is to establish regulatory frame for management of POP brominated flame retardants, UV328, Decloran Plus, and related articles and waste categories, including also robust financing. Recommended activity options would be the inclusion of PBDEs, other brominated flame retardants, UV328, Decloran Plus in the list of banned or restricted substances, but also consider here the need for exemptions when restricting these POPs. Another activity, assessment of regulatory framework for these substances and the products and waste sectors containing these substances in other countries, and to look what is the status in their own country and if there is a need for overall improvement of these regulatory frames. Then set low POP content limits and unintentional trace contaminant limits for POP plastic additives, and assess of a flame retardant strategy of the European Union, here from the European Chemical Agency, because here the European Chemical Agency tried to regulate certain chemicals as a group and assess the possible usefulness of this approach for the country. So the approach here for the European Chemical Agency is to have a regulatory strategy for all flame retardants. So this was published in March 2023. And then in December 2024, the European Chemical Agency published a report on aromatic brominated flame retardants, highlighting that the use in articles poses significant environmental risk, since all aromatic brominated flame retardants are PBT or very persistent and very bioaccumulative. And the report also noted that some alternatives, including organophosphorus flame retardants, may present hazardous characteristics for human health and the environment. And so therefore, at the moment, the EU Commission has now given the European Chemical Agency a mandate to prepare a restriction dossier for all polymeric additive aromatic brominated flame retardants. Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting approach you can look at when you develop your action plan for the brominated POPs. Also, the EU Commission was asking to European Chemical Agency for preparation of an investigation report on organophosphorus flame retardant and other flame retardants. And these reports are expected by the end of this year. But here you can already look here to the regulatory strategy of flame retardants and these investigating the report into aromatic brominated flame retardants, and then consider them for your action plan. Because when you look to these substances, brominated aromatic flame retardants, you see that most of them are, for a chemist, straightforward that they will be persistent. Yeah, when you have a fully brominated aromatic system, this does not really degrade in soil. Yeah. So therefore, I think this is a good approach. Then what is very important for the action plan, background, sustainable financing is essential for environmental sound management of waste. One of the main instruments is the extended producer responsibility. So the recommended activity options are the development of regulatory frame for POP containing products and waste considering extended producer responsibility. Develop a regulatory frame for electronics considering extended producer responsibility and look, for example, to regulations in Ghana or Nigeria or in the European Union. Development of a regulatory frame for vehicles and also regulatory frame for construction sector considering including extended producer responsibility. And here I recommend you that you have a look to these OECD reports, where also in one of these reports on this picture, you can find something on extended producer responsibility and the construction sector. Today, we invited Mr. Alexander Bateiger, who is the head of the Global Action Partnership for Extended Producer Responsibility at OECD, who will give some insight on international EPR activities and support options. Always, also for action plans 2, and Katarina Sepkova highlighted it, is the inventory. And normally non-inventory is complete. So therefore, a recommended activity option is to develop or refine sectoral inventories, consider all relevant POPs, other chemicals of concern, and major resources for the circular economy, inventory of the current production and use of POP plastic additives. Yeah, so first look what is produced in your country, what is used in your country in the production, and then refine inventories for POPs and other chemicals of concern in electronics, in the transport sector, and in the building and construction sector. But also assess the need of POP inventories in other minor uses. I have mentioned already the textile industry. With textiles, it's very difficult because, yes, they are normally not marked that they contain a POP. And therefore, at the moment, it's very complicated to do an inventory without doing really detailed measurements. Then data management for stocks and waste containing POPs, but also consider plastics and resources. Here, I recommend you the recorded GGKP webinar on the sectoral approach to inventories of POPs and other chemicals of concern. We had in 2024, but that's recorded. And also, I recommend you the recorded GGKP webinar on the methodology to address gaps in POP data and statistical office, which is also recorded. And these guidance also, let's say, give a suggestion for national statistical offices to also look to these big sectors, have good data on these 3 big sectors in your national statistical office, and within the data to have the POP information, to have the plastic information, and to have the information on the resources and what kind of metals. Because this kind of data you will need when you move to a more circular economy where plastic and metals are core. I also would like for the inventories highlight to have a look to the case studies. We have in the sectoral guidance here a case study for material and substance flow analysis in electronic equipment, then a case study for the transport sector, also with dynamic material and substance flow analysis, and something similar we also have in the GGKP website for buildings. Why I highlight the substance flow analysis? Because, you know, on one page, a policymaker can really understand what is the matter. Yeah, here this is for Nigeria and the PBDEs in the end of life in the vehicles. So with the inventory, we understood how much DKBDE have entered Nigeria. That was 1,400 tons. We have estimated how much are still in registered vehicles. These are more than 1,000 tons. And then look to the end of life and evaluated in the material and substance flow analysis where these PBDEs are going. Yeah, and interesting, a part of it goes to spare parts and in stocks, and again from the spare parts in new registered vehicles. Yeah, so therefore I'm a big friend of this, and I hope that in your countries you can establish an institution to look into these dynamic material and substance flow analysis. This is also still from the Nigerian transport sector. When you have really a dynamic material substance flow analysis, you can also make time projections on the POPs when they will come to the end of life. Yeah, and here for Nigeria, in our modeling, and this modeling was quite robust together with Vienna University, we estimated that the peak amount of DKBDE will be around 2028, 2029. Yeah, and still in 2040 in Nigeria, we estimate that the end of life vehicles will still contain 25 tons of DKBDE per year. So it's very important here to consider the life cycle, and therefore We will also in the action plan look to the life cycle. In addition, in this slide, I would like to introduce you one book. In Europe, we had a European Union project which looked to this kind of risk of plastic additives and the recycling cycle. And finally, from this project, they have developed these two books. And the second one, the Global Risk-Based Management of Chemical Additives 2, is really a good handbook. You might have a look, especially for your research institutions. For the action plan also, we will look to the sound life cycle management. So here to the third objective, sound life cycle management of product and waste categories that contain POP plastic additives is established. Recommended activity options are compilation of information on the management of products and waste containing POPs in major sectors and the fate of these POPs and other pollutants as a first activity. Then the assessment of recycling and separation options of POP impacted plastic additives and waste categories and possible integration in a general plastic management and recycling strategy of the country. Then, as an activity, assessment of the management and destruction options for waste plastics for major waste categories that contain POPs in the country, but also in the region. One thing you need to consider is that at the moment, yes, with PCBs, you have several tons and maybe these few tons you might export. Yeah. When we talk about plastic additives from e-waste, we are talking about hundreds of tons or thousands of tons or 10,000 of tons, depending on the country, when you have a big country like Nigeria. So therefore, these huge amounts you normally cannot export, also in respect to the costs. Yeah. So therefore, the topic of regional management, yeah, or national management will become more important. Then, as activity, environmental sound management of POPs and chemical of concern containing plastics and other polymers from electronics, environmental sound management of these plastics from end-of-life vehicles, and also environmental sound management of POP containing plastic and other polymers in construction and demolition waste with the larger frame of hazardous substances and resource management in these three sectors. Actually, there was not much knowledge about POPs in polymers, and therefore we have started 2 years ago a master thesis and now a PhD thesis, and we are looking into this. And like Katka said in the beginning, in the introduction, yes, the construction sector today might be one of the largest reservoirs of brominated POP flame retardants. Especially because for electronics, much of these POPs have already entered end of life. But for the construction sector, the plastic is much more longer there, therefore quite relevant. Then activity, environmental sound management of POP containing polymers in other uses, if found relevant in the country, look to textiles, look to leather, look to furniture and mattresses. But often in developing countries, mattresses are normally not flame retardant, for example. And then environmentally sound disposal of POP containing plastic waste, best linked to a larger national strategy on how to manage plastic waste. So there are guidance documents for managing POP containing plastics. One is from the Stockholm Convention. We have a BAT-BEP guidance document for PBDEs and dechlorant containing plastic, but at the same time, the same plastic contain also UV328 and the other plastic additives. So therefore, let's say it can be looked at also from a broader perspective. And we have a good recent Basel Convention technical guidance on environmental sound management of plastic waste, which have been published. I have put you the link. And also there, of course, the POPs, but also other chemicals of concern are mentioned. And staying at this BAT-BEP guidance, in the BAT-BEP guidance for the Stockholm Convention, you find here range of full-scale recycling plants which are operating already, but mainly in industrial countries. But also we know that plastic can be separated in developing countries. There is a good report from India about how they make separation. And there are at the moment projects in Africa which also want to implement here the separation, the environmental sound management of these type of plastics. This here is an example of a full-scale recycling plant for pop-containing plastic for the end-of-life vehicles. Here in Europe, we have a major company, Galoo, which is separating here the different plastic types by zinc float. So here, the zinc float plastic is separating brominated, chlorinated, and fluorinated plastic, which are sinking because they are more heavy. And the non-impacted plastic, polyethylene, polypropylene, without specific additives, they are floating, can be separated, and then they can be recycled. I have put you here a YouTube link to it to have a look at. As a fourth action plan and objective is alternative for plastic additives in exempted uses are assessed by a science-based approach and are substituted by the most sustainable chemical and non-chemical solution. Yeah, you have seen we have still exemptions for Decloran Plus, UV328, DKBDE, SCCP, MCCP. So therefore these alternatives and alternative assessment becomes more and more important. You see here the Stockholm Convention have developed guidance documents about alternatives here for SCCPs and here for DKBDE, and the recommended activity options are compilation of information on more sustainable chemical alternatives to pop plastic additives. So here the BRS guidance documents are one of these, but there are many more. Then compilation of information of non-chemical alternatives, education and capacity building on alternative assessment. Then activity is selection of the most sustainable and green alternative chemicals and non-chemical solution in the different uses, and phase in of sustainable chemicals and non-chemical alternatives. I show you one example here for the DKBDE. The DKBDE here in plastic and electronics can be substituted on 3 different levels. The first and most simple is just flame retardant substitution. Yeah. So this approach involves identifying of a drop-in chemical substitute for DKBDE. And for example, one of these is the decabromodiphenyl ethane. Yeah. So the only difference in this molecule between the DKBDE is we have a ethane instead of oxygen. Yeah. But just recently, the European Chemical Agency have also labeled this as very persistent and very bioaccumulative and a substance of very high concern. Yeah. So therefore, my recommendation is not to substitute it with this one, but maybe go to resin and material substitution. This approach involves then changing the resin and changing the chemical use and also the flame retardant. Yeah. Here, for example, then use a phosphorus flame retardant. Or to change product design. This approach involves changing to the actual product design to minimize, for example, or eliminate the need of flame retardants, for example, just by barrier materials, or separating the heat source from the plastic, or go to operation at low voltage. Yeah. So these are non-chemical approaches. Yeah. So you see there are a variety, and this is now just one, I think, good example. You can have a look at this in this publication here. And I recommend you, when you look into this substitution, to our publication from 2015, where we have proposed a current and recommended substitution for to avoid regrettable substitutes. Yeah, and the recommendation is here to do the phase out binding and cross-sectoral, to inventory the alternatives also for structural different substances. When we do the assessment of alternative, to do a complete assessment, including life cycle impacts, and possibly do a fundamental substitution, like I showed you for the electronics, for example, with the barriers, and to do an effective phase out. But also the OECD has compiled materials. Here they have substitution and alternative assessment toolbox. I can recommend you, I have put you the link. And in Germany, for example, one national authority has developed a whole website, so-called Subsport Plus, which is just about substitution of hazardous chemicals in different areas. I have also put you the link there, maybe as an idea, as an activity for your country. Then science-based assessment, if any exemption for the use of POP plastic additives is needed. If it's needed, then to notify the BRS Secretariat and COP on the needed exemption with the appropriate information. And this includes what exemption you want, the estimated quantity of products, the purpose of production and use, and the reason for exemption. But then also as an activity, a periodic review to assess the need of continued exemption and assess the alternatives, because the industry is coming year by year with new alternatives. This means when you ask for an exemption for 5 years, maybe 1 year later, there is already a good alternative available. So therefore, a recommendation here is that you do a periodic review if you need the exemption. So if you use an exemption, then the application of BAT-BEP in the exemption is a relevant activity. Here the objective is BAT-BEP is applied if exempted POPs are used and release and exposure is minimized. The recommended activity options are to define and implement best available techniques and best environmental practice for production of POP plastic additives, including release limits, and develop related control of production, release, and waste. Also, to apply BAT-BEP for exempted uses of POP plastic additives when you use it in production. This means, for example, DKBD in plastic production of vehicle spare parts, or Decloran Plus in exempted uses, or the UV328 and the different exempted uses. So here we have BAT-BEP guidance also for UV328 and medium chain chlorinated paraffins, which are now under development. So they are not available on the Stockholm Convention website yet. And if you use these alternatives, these POPs in products, then consider as an activity possibly labeling of new products containing exempted POPs. So this is here an example for labeling. For labeling of chemicals in electronics, there is an ISO standard for electronics. This is the ISO 11469. And here there are different parts of this ISO standard, and there is part 3 on plasticizers, like SCCP and MCCPs, and here on flame retardants. And so by labeling of these electronics, including these part 3 and part 4, electronics at least can be labeled. Unfortunately, this has not been developed for other products yet. Then, as a sixth part of your action plan, the objective is on education and awareness of major stakeholders on POPs containing products and waste is created, including integrated in the frame on awareness of chemicals in products. This means not only focus on POPs, but look broader, look to the global framework on chemicals, where all hazardous chemicals in electronics are included, or also chemicals in product itself as an issue of concern. Recommended activity options are develop a strategy to raise awareness on the impact of POPs and other chemicals of concern on health the environment, and recycling in the life cycle of electronic vehicles, buildings, textiles, and other product categories, considering gender mainstreaming and vulnerable populations. Developing awareness raising and education materials on POPs and chemicals of concern in these sectors. Then awareness raising and education for stakeholders, including policymakers, industry, recyclers, research, and the public on POPs in these products, with a larger education activity on chemicals, within a larger activity on chemicals in products and chemicals in the life cycle of electronics. Yeah, in cooperation with the Global Framework on Chemicals. Awareness raising of the public on POP impacted plastic within a general awareness on plastic risk and chemicals in products, and linked to activities on sustainable consumption. This means SDG 12. Then capacity building of authorities and institutions for developing the regulatory frame for life cycle management of these sectors, to develop training materials and programs for the enforcement of the policy and regulatory frame, because this regulatory frame, one thing is to develop it, yeah, but even more complicated is to enforce it, yeah, and to implement it, yeah. So therefore, a detailed strategy is needed for the implementation. Therefore, the suggestion to develop training materials for that. Capacity building for implementation of the regulatory frame for management of these sectors and other impacted waste, and implementation in the individual sectors, and also including training and education for customs authorities on the control of imports of e-waste, end-of-life vehicles, and possibly relevant POP-containing products and waste. Important also, especially for the workforces, therefore a specific activity to development of education and training materials for the management and handling of POPs and chemicals of concern in these sectors for the workforce, and capacity building of handling and management of POPs and training of workers in production, in recycling, and in waste management for the relevant sectors within the life cycle for these large products. And I give here also some examples here for e-waste. For e-waste, there is education and training materials on the BRS Secretariat website. This is the e-waste challenge massive open online course together with university. This is really big material. So it starts here, you see the head of the BRS convention, and also Inga Andersen, the executive director, give here a foreword for this training material. So a very robust training material. Also, very good training materials have been developed by GIZ in their Lighthouse project in Ghana. This project is now running for nearly 10 years. It will run until 2026. And you see here what kind of handbooks, business cases, but also handbooks for e-waste training manuals and so on have been developed and can be downloaded. I have put you the link. Also, there are the first training materials for end-of-life vehicles. I give you here 3 examples. One is our BAD-BEP guidance here from the Stockholm Convention. This is on the shredder plants for treatment of end-of-life vehicles. Then also from this Ghana project from GIZ, there is a first publication about manual dismantling of cars at a scrapyard, a description and improvement needs. And from the Island GEF project, there is practitioner guidelines on the depollution of end-of-life vehicles, the depollution guideline. And for construction and demolition waste, there are good materials from the European Commission. I have put you here 3 larger guidelines here, for example, for waste audits before demolition and renovation works of buildings, or hazardous substances and construction and production materials, which goes beyond the POPs and look to all the pollutants. And two education and awareness raising materials I found relevant and helpful. One is the fact that the chemicals, these additives, caused a decrease in sperm quality. When you look to Europe, our sperm quality has decreased over the last 60 years by 50%. And there are 29 chemicals or chemical groups relevant to these kind of decrease. Many of those are POP additives. Yeah, so the PBDEs, but also PCBs, also PFASs, but then there are other plastic additives like phthalates, bisphenols, organophosphate esters. Yeah, so for all these chemicals, a correlation has been found to the decrease of the sperms. Yeah, and this need to be considered and is, I think, a very good argument to substitute these kind of chemicals and come to more sustainable and greener solutions. This study has open access. Yeah, I have put you here the reference. But also when you look to impact on women's health, we see that these kind of chemicals have an impact, for example, on breast cancer. I put you here one study about PBDEs on breast cancer. And we see that breast cancer is increasing also over the last 60 years continuously, basically in all countries. And in addition, here for the females, these kind of chemicals can impact the next generation, including, for example, the decrease of the IQ, also for the PBDEs. So there are very good awareness materials from the United Nations, here the Endocrine Disrupting Chemical Report, which is currently updated. From the science community here, I recommend you to look to the book of Theo Kalborn about our stolen future, or from NGOs here, from the women engaged, women in Europe for common future or engaged in a common future, which have also good materials with a gender perspective in respect to these chemicals, including the chemical additives we are talking about here in this action plan workshop. Then 2/7, this is then analysis and monitoring of these POP plastic additives. Here, the objective is to have established monitoring of POP flame retardants and other POPs and chemicals of concern in plastics and other priority areas, and in recycling. The recommended activities is here assessment of options for monitoring of POP plastic additives in the country or region. Yeah, because it's complicated. So therefore, I think also in Africa, it's good to look what kind of regional approach might be possible. Establish of monitoring approaches for POP plastic additives and other chemicals of concern in plastic. Then do the monitoring of these in product categories, related waste, and in recycling. Also improve of the inventory by monitoring where relevant gaps have been identified. Like I said, for textiles, without monitoring, it's basically impossible. Then possibly monitor of humans, biota, environment, and contaminated sites. And here I show you how relevant this is. This is a study from the International Pollutant Elimination Network. They monitor eggs around the world, and these are just some results from this egg monitoring, where you see around e-waste sites very high PBDE levels in these eggs are finally found. Yeah, so you do open burning, but the PBDEs don't degrade. It goes into soil, and finally your chicken pick these ashes and the soils, and finally you have it in the eggs. Here in Akboboshi, for example, which was mentioned by Alexander before. Also, the highest brominated dioxin contamination were found at these e-waste and end-of-life dismantling sites. Here in Ghana, the level here in this egg were huge, but also in other countries here, Thailand, also close to 100 to 80 picogram TEQ per gram fed. This is still around 20 times above regulatory limits. And also chlorinated dioxins and PCBs are found there. And for one of these eggs, we did a calculation. So this is the highest contaminated egg we found in Africa. And if a child would have eaten this egg, yeah, a 15 kilogram child, this would be the tolerable daily intake of 230 days, considering FAO tolerable daily intake. And when you take the European Union tolerable intake, this one egg would be sufficient for this child for 5 years tolerable daily intake. Yeah. So you see that we need to take care, need to improve the situation, but also we need to look to these contaminated sites and manage them. And therefore, the last proposed activity action plan is on contaminated sites. The objective is sites potentially contaminated with these POP flame retardants and other POPs, including also brominated dioxins, which are currently evaluated in the POP review committee, are identified, assessed, and contaminated sites secured and possibly remediated. So here the recommended activity options are train and upgrade skills of personnel in identification, assessment, securing, and remediation of contaminated sites, analytical confirmation of POP plastic additives, brominated dioxins, and other POP contamination at identified locations, develop strategies for environmental sound management of POP contaminated sites, take measures to secure the contaminated sites, to stop human exposure and environmental release. You know, the remediation of the soils are very difficult, right? It's huge amounts of soils, for example, in Accra, yeah. But what you can do, of course, you can aware the population and you can tell that they should not let run their chicken directly on these contaminated sites where the ashes are, but on a separate area. Take measures to secure the contaminated sites, identify of cleanup measures, and possibly initiate a cleanup starting with high priority sites. And for that, a guidance has been developed from the Stockholm Convention, but BEP Group has been published in 2025, and I recommend you to have a look at it. This guidance can help you to find these sites, to evaluate these sites. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and I ask Hannes if there is already a question to ask or if we continue with the next presentation.
So thank you, Roland. This has been, I have to admit, very educational for me as well. So we have a couple of comments actually that would be interesting to get your reflection on, maybe just very quickly before we go to Alexander. This is in the Q&A box. There's a comment here where it says, the use of plastics is going to increase with population, and the percentage of recycling capacity is low in developing countries. As a result, plastic waste is going to increase significantly. If you could comment on this. And in parallel, the same person also asks, can plastics be realistically replaced with bioplastics and natural materials? If you can comment and maybe answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, you probably know that there is a big discussion in the development of the plastic treaty if there should be a cap for plastic production. Yeah, at least that not the, you know, when you think about the protections from the projections of the industry, they hope for an increase of doubling the amount of plastic or even tripling the amount of plastic produced. So I think with the current frame, this is impossible. And I hope that, let's say, these kind of limitation or reduction of plastic will become a part of the plastic treaty. Yeah, but of course, yes, in developing countries at the moment the recycling rates are very low. So this is another area where situation can be improved. And at the moment, in most developing countries, you have not established, for example, co-incineration in cement plants. So in Germany, a huge amount of our plastic, yeah, if it's appropriately separated, can go into cement plants and can substitute their primary fuel. So this means it is a kind of win-win. It reduces the waste and it overall helps and reduce the overall release of greenhouse gases. Yeah, when you substitute here your primary fuel. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Roland. I think there's a couple of others, but I will leave it for the Q&A. And in the meantime, I would once again thank you, Roland, for a very interesting intervention. Remind all of the participants that we have a Q&A session at the end of the two experts' interventions. So please keep in mind any questions you have. But now I will move to our next expert speaker. And please let me introduce Alexander Batteiger, who is the head of the Secretariats of the Prevent Waste Alliance and the Global Action Partnership for Extended Producer Responsibility with GIZ, which is the German Corporation for International Cooperation. With a master's in industrial engineering, Alexander has an extensive background in circular economy and sustainable waste management, in particular around electronics and e-waste, and has also previously worked as a researcher in environmental engineering. Alexander, may I please hand over to you?
So thank you, Hannes, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Roland, as well, for setting up the webinar. It's a great pleasure to present to a community I normally do not talk to. I think it's extremely relevant that we or that different sectors talk to each other, because some of the problems are solved in other sectors. So we'll talk today about financing sectorial circularity, and we'll give some inputs on basic principles of extended producer responsibility, one of the, let's say, financing mechanisms that are discussed to solve those problems. I will start a little bit with my first role. I'm coordinating the Prevent Waste Alliance. We're an international think and do tank for circular economy practitioners. Above 650 members from private sector, academia, civil society, and public institutions. Launched in 2019. Already changed the slides. Launched in 2019 by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. We happen to host working groups on plastics, e-waste and batteries, and organic waste. And we work a lot on cross-cutting issues like financing circular economy, and we pilot projects. And so this is a bit the setup, what we work on. It's a lot about knowledge sharing, and then as well about developing guidelines and standards. We've built international partnerships. I will indicate that later on. And we do implement as well circular solutions. So I wanted to set the scene a bit about what is actually e-waste and of-life vehicle or battery management look like in some developing countries. So there is a rapid increase in those products that contain the POPs, like end-of-life vehicles or e-waste and batteries. So there's rising domestic consumption, there's production, imports of new and used products. There's as well the energy and mobility transition that brings more material. And the reality is as well that there is informal e-waste collection, dismantling, and recycling provides livelihoods for many people. And the main focus is on the valuable fractions, while non-valuable or hazardous parts often dumped or burned. And this is where the, let's say, the toxic contaminations starts. And the products that Roland has already mentioned, they contain those hazardous substances, and if mismanaged, they can pose serious environmental and health risk, as just indicated with this very illustrative example of the eggs in Agbogbloshie. And I deeply care about that because I have worked for 3 years in Ghana at that very site, and indeed there is the need for improvement. So what's the reality in very practical terms on the ground? So Normally, there are several small and medium enterprise recyclers who try to manage e-waste or batteries or vehicles sustainably, but they face as well multiple barriers. So vehicles or cars or electronic waste, they're quite they're a composition of products, and sometimes there is a local solution. So that's oftentimes the case for the metals, be it the lead from the batteries or steel and copper. Then there are other, let's say, components to those products like printed circuit boards or the lithium-ion batteries. They need to be shipped to smelters abroad currently. And there's e-waste plastics. I made a question mark over there. Sometimes it has to be shipped to processors abroad. Sometimes there is local management. But unfortunately, oftentimes it's just burned or dumped because there is just no market for that. And the reality is that if the market for sustainable end-of-life management of those products is unregulated or not fully regulated, there is no level playing field for sustainable actors. So they can be outcompeted by informal and as well formal actors that do not fully comply with rules and regulation. So this is, I would say, the overall framework condition that recyclers that want to do, let's say, the right thing and work sustainably face. And unless we do not tackle it, we will not see the change on the ground that is, let's say, needed and desired by so many people. So that's overall a little bit of, I would say, a framework that we have tried to develop within GSZ and Prevent, and as well the GAP for EPR, that the fundamental, let's say, or baseline assessment is that environmentally sound management comes with additional cost. And we believe that in the long run, EPR is one of the most promising financing approaches to tackle the financing of sustainable e-waste and vehicle management. So how do we get there? So we normally propose short-term interventions that can be some market interventions with alternative financing mechanisms, can be e-waste compensation or something like that, but as well to pilot how things can be sustainably collected or treated. In the midterm, it would be something like establishing producer responsibility organizations and to build the infrastructure that is needed in the long term as well, a full EPR rollout. And looking into what I have just said is, if you look into the development in the European Union around the end-of-life vehicle regulation, they have figured out that EPR is as well quite reasonable financing mechanism for the objectives that are being set regarding end-of-life management. And it's I would say, the first regulation that will be enforced for this sector. But now I set the scene for EPR. But what is basically EPR is at the heart of let's say the presentation, and it's a policy approach that makes producers responsible for their products along the life cycle. So the idea is that the entity that benefits from selling a product is supposed to pay as well for the externalities that are being caused over the life cycle. And EPR systems are differently, let's say, implemented. It really depends from country to country, but it's very important to define the roles and responsibilities of the actors. Very practically speaking, we see that mandatory EPR schemes show better monitoring and enforcement. There's less free riding, so that's what we would suggest for countries, but as well, so there's the role as well for the government. So if they set, let's say, the right responsibilities, it's more likely that EPR will be implemented successfully. And as well, there is a differentiation between financial EPR schemes. So they are basically just an operating system for producers and recyclers, where the financial flows are mentioned, let's say, organized and operational EPR schemes that actually work as well in e-waste management. And there's a differentiation between individual responsibility and collective responsibility. So it can be a company that runs its own EPR scheme, or a sector can run its EPR scheme. So now we look a little bit into who is supposed to do what. So governments, they are in the lead to develop EPR policies, including the targets, and as well for the law enforcement and the monitoring of the systems. Then the companies, quite often they are considered to be the producers, but as well importers can be producers. They have to ensure the collection, sorting, and recycling of their products. So in this case, I present for packaging waste, but it is exactly the same if you talk about e-waste or vehicles. And as well, the producer responsibility organization, which is at the heart of the system, because they fulfill the obligations of the obliged companies, and they basically coordinate between the different actors. Then as well, consumers do play a role there. So it's they ideally should reduce the amount of packaging or products that are being put on market. And the question from the audience was going in that direction, and as well about guaranteeing that there's a correct disposal pathway of the products. And then as well, waste management operators, so those companies who actually then receive the material flows to be treated in the system. And last but not least, municipalities play as well a very strong role, because in many countries they are responsible for waste management, and they can potentially as well organize the collection of different waste streams. And sometimes they already do, or oftentimes they already do. So that's another list of interests, I would say. So for citizens and consumers, the interest is affordable product prices, no increase in taxes and municipal fees, and of course, a clean and healthy environment. And the expectation towards an EPR scheme is that it should clearly communicate how it's financed, and as well tangible improvements. For municipalities, so they want to see sound municipal services with reasonable efforts and cost. So it must fit as well into their structures. So if you implement an EPR scheme, you really have to involve them, because oftentimes they are currently doing the waste management, and introducing EPR can be a change process into local processes. For the waste managers and recyclers, they expect more business and value addition, and they want to benefit from EPR schemes. Then another reality is that in many countries, and I would actually include as well European countries, there's an informal sector, and they really want to stay in business, and they want to improve their situation, and they should have as well a role in the system. And this is to be defined. And last but not least, the producers. So they want a level playing field around sustainability. So there should be fair competition. So if you participate in the system, you should not have a disadvantage compared to your competitors. And they really want to have a reliable action corridor. So if you start thinking around developing policies really stick to it. If you change the rules too often, it's very complicated for the producers to follow. So it should be mandatory for all producers. There should be clear rules and responsibilities, and the enforcement must as well focus on free riders. So I can give as well an example of the European Union. The marketplaces, be it Amazon or eBay or all the online stores we had, it took us quite a while to integrate them into EPR schemes. And this was causing difficulties in the industry. So there's really something to focus on. And in some setups, it can be as well interesting to observe whether and how to, let's say, integrate the import of used products into EPR schemes. And the recommendation would be to treat them as if they were new products. And what is really necessary if you want to implement EPR is to have very good stakeholder consultation and repeated organized exchange on EPR related decisions. So that's really at the heart of EPR. It's a collaborative approach, and very good stakeholder consultation is necessary for successful EPR implementation. So next slide. So where can you find information? At Prevent, we were launched in 2019, and in basically all working groups, we figured out that financing circular economy is one of the stumbling blocks towards more circularity. So we started to develop a product called EPR Toolbox to increase knowledge about EPR for packaging, but we're opening up as well for other sectors. And this has been our, I would say, landmark publication so far. So there are a couple of modules around general aspects of extended producer responsibilities and schemes for them. You will find in the document fact sheets for, let's say, general introduction, a glossary, key readings, roles and responsibilities, how PROs are established. It's really accessible. It's an interactive PDF document. I will share the link subsequently. Then there's another module around collection and sorting of waste, and as well on recycling. And then we have as well some country reports, and we're adding reports to that frequently, and as well background information and FAQs. The EPR Toolbox is currently available, I think, in 9 languages. We're adding French very soon, but it's available in Chinese, it's available in English, in Spanish, in Montenegrin, Indonesian, Philippine, and a couple of other questions. And French and Portuguese will be added very, very soon. So that's the contents, or there are 14 fact sheets on different aspects, and the country reports, and the languages. And there are as well training materials for each fact sheets and presentations. So if you go to the YouTube channel of Prevent Waste Alliance, you will find as well videos with our experts who have been doing the work. And we did not stop there. So the EPR Toolbox has, let's say, has been received quite well by a lot of stakeholders. So we were approached by UNEP that we should do something together, let's say more coordinated on EPR. So we joined forces with UNEP, WWF, OECD, and GIZ, and we receive as well circular economy support from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And we set up the Global Action Partnership for EPR. It was launched in October 2023. We have 3 key pillars. There's a library with curated information on EPR. So if you go to the website, you will directly find that. Our most relevant publications are there, but there's a lot of publications from other institutions. And we strive for a common understanding of EPR, because there's sometimes, I would say, the conceptions are not very aligned. And we have as well a help desk where we provide coordinated and tailored technical support. We normally support over there either government officials or producer responsibility organizations that are on the way to implement or want to start something. So we have already supported in Malaysia, in Argentina, in the Philippines. We have been working as well in Mexico. We're setting something up in Ecuador currently and in Montenegro. And if you want to reach out regarding support, just write an email to the email address that is being mentioned there. Having said that, it is limited by the funding we have available, but it's a quite interesting setup we have there. And that's another summary of that. We have as well a community of practice on EPR there. So if you're interested in an organization, write an email to us and we will see how we can involve you in that space. So I'm very happy that Roland already mentioned that. So that's our, I would say, landmark publication as a GEF for EPR. So really, if you want to dig a bit into the basic facts and key principles, go to that publication. It's available in 3 languages already. These are the QR codes for direct downloads. There are as well webinars available for those policy documents we developed there. And I will stop at this stage, and I'm very happy to receive questions now or later.
Thank you, Alexander. Very interesting indeed. And we have Roland coming up for another session, but maybe before we pass to Roland, I think it's one question that has arisen is with EPR, to what degree can it more rapidly help countries implement more effective recycling facilities to deal with complex waste? So at the moment, a lot of waste is shipped around the world for recycling. Is EPR a good solution to this to help finance and bring in the innovation required to develop the right type of recycling facilities in country? Or for some countries, is it just too expensive and complicated due to their size to have all types of recycling facilities for all types of waste?
So I might come to the last topic, looking into. So I'm an e-waste expert. I think there's hardly any country on Earth that has all, let's say, recycling facilities you would actually need to sustainably treat e-waste. So for most countries on Earth, it's not even desirable or economic to develop all capabilities you need. Some of the treatment can be done in other countries. For example, the United States, they're not extremely good in refining printed circuit boards. So even in a market that size, they do not have all capacities. But to a certain degree, you would want to have good collection infrastructures, pre-treatment, so manual separation of the fractions. And then really it has to be defined on the level of fractions, what to do locally and what to ship to international markets. And looking into the Basel Convention, I would say you try to develop as many capacities locally as possible because of the principle of proximity that is being in the Basel Convention. But sometimes it just doesn't make sense, and then you go for shipping. So that's the the aspect there, but it really depends on the country where you're in, the region where you are, and the capacities that are available. So there's no general response to that. And looking into financing and building the appropriate infrastructure, that's a hot topic. We will publish a discussion paper on that very soon, because we get this question very soon. I already indicated in the presentation that it's a mid to long term EPR can work. If you want to see action on the ground today, it's not the right policy approach, but it shouldn't stop you from implementing EPR policies. So you have to do it at the same time. And it improves the framework conditions for recyclers, so it can de-risk investments. But really, seeing it on the ground is where it gets more complicated. We have seen it in Eastern Europe, that infrastructures can be built while EPR is being implemented. But this is one of the, let's say, main lines of work to be seen.
No, thank you very much. I have questions of my own related to design, but I think I'll leave it to the Q&A. I think we can have a more in-depth discussion in the Q&A. So, Alexander, many thanks. We'll put you on the line again during the Q&A session, but in the meantime, I'll pass back to Roland for his next session. Thank you, Roland.
Yes, thank you, Hannes. And that's the last presentation for today. You can see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so it's on action plan consideration for management and phase out of medium and short chain chlorinated paraffins. So from short chain chlorinated paraffins were listed in 2017 in Annex A and also received a wide range of exemptions when they were listed. And the medium chain chlorinated paraffins were just listed at COP12 in May 2025. Also with a wide range of exemption. To the chemical, chlorinated paraffins are quite complex mixtures of chlorinated alkanes. According to their chain lengths, they are subdivided into short chain chlorinated paraffins. These are those which have a carbon chain between 10 and 13. Then medium chain chlorinated paraffin with a chain length of carbon 14 to 17, and long chain chlorinated paraffins with a carbon chain length longer of carbon 18 and longer. Chlorinated paraffins are also produced with different chlorination degree, varying between 30 to 70% by weight. The variation options of chain length and chlorination degree makes them quite versatile, and approximately 200 commercial chlorinated paraffin formulations are in use. The Stockholm Convention listed the SCCPs, short-chain chlorinated paraffins, with a chlorine content of more than 48% as POP, but also chlorinated paraffin mixtures which contain more than 1% of short-chain chlorinated paraffins are considered POPs. Yeah, so therefore, it's so important, to analyze and understand if a certain chlorinated paraffin mixture is considered as a SCCP or not, because, for example, major producers today in the world, they are defining normally depending on chlorination degree and are not looking so much into the chain length. And similar to the medium chain chlorinated paraffins, also here we have a limitation of the chlorination content. Only those which have more than 45% are listed in the Stockholm Convention, and also here chlorinated paraffin mixtures, but the limit is here 3% of medium chain chlorinated paraffin are considered POPs. They are also used in these three major sectors, electronics, transport, and construction. However, they have further relevant uses. I will come to them. What is important is their huge production volume. So this increased drastically the last 20 years. And since 2010, the world is producing more than 1 million ton of chlorinated paraffin every year. The current production is estimated to around 1.4 million tons a year. And the global production capacity is above 2 million tons a year. For the different SCCPs, it's estimated that we have a production of around 300,000 tons, often in mixture, and the medium chain chlorinated paraffin overall is produced around 1 million ton a year. Major producers are China and India. The biggest producer is China, estimated to at least 700,000 tons, could also be close to 1 million ton, and India around 375,000 tons. Further productions are in Egypt, Russia, Qatar, South Africa, United States, and some of these countries have already restricted the production of SCCPs, including China. In total, by 2020, more than 33 million tons of technical chlorinated paraffins have been produced, including 9 million tons SCCP, 19 million tons medium chain paraffin, and the major global estimated use was mainly in PVC, around 60% as additive, followed by rubber, around 15% paraffins going into rubber production, lubricants and metalworking fluids, also 15%, adhesives and sealants, around 6%, and paints and coatings, around 4%. By 2026, when we estimate with the yearly production, we are now around 40 million tons of chlorinated paraffins produced. This means more than all other POPs together. So when we look into the uses, the PVC, a big part of the PVC is going into construction, around 60%. 9 to 15% is going into electronics and transport. From the rubber, about 10% is going into construction, and also paints and coatings and sealants are mainly used in construction. Yeah. So therefore, when you have seen before the overview of POPs used in these three main sectors, yes, SCCP and MCCPs are very big also in these sectors. However, there are several other uses like the metalworking fluids, the lubricants, fat liquors, and also the use in textile. Therefore, SCCP, MCCP cannot be covered by this sectoral approach only, yeah, and especially that such a huge amount of them are still produced. For the action plan, we start again with the regulatory framework, established policy and regulatory frame for the use, management, and substitution of SCCP and MCCP, industrial uses, and in products and waste. The recommended activity options are assessment of regulatory frames for controlling SCCPs and MCCPs, which are already existing. For example, the European Union is regulating SCCPs since more than 20 years and also have included the MCCPs already in the regulation. Then for the countries amending existing laws or develop new laws related to restriction, control, and management of SCCP, MCCPs, including low POP content limit. And what is even more important is the unintentional trace contaminant limit. This is the limit how much would be allowed in new products. Then consider in the regulatory frame also the exemptions needed for the medium chain chlorinated paraffins when you make the regulatory frame, improvement of custom control and of the labeling and traceability of chemicals and chemicals in products, recommendation to have to develop GHS implementation in your country if you not do yet. And this is also at the same time in the global framework on chemicals and a good synergy. Possibly implement extended producer responsibility for SCCP, MCCP, and related products. Maybe, Alexander, afterwards you have 20 minutes time to think about if you can consider extended producer responsibility for such chemicals also. Then refining the inventories. Here recommendation is activities are inventory of companies producing chlorinated paraffins and inventory of the different CP mixtures they produce, the customers and the uses. Then use the CAS numbers to assess companies that import or trade chemicals with suspected HS codes. Unfortunately, chlorinated paraffins do not have specific HS codes yet. So therefore, the HS codes is only a rough estimate, and you need in the import look to let's say specifics like the CAS numbers. Then assess companies which are possibly using chlorinated paraffins in production. This means the producers of PVC in your country, of rubber products, of paints, producers of lubricants and of fat liquors, including the supply chains. Then inventory of the import and presence of SCCP, MCCPs in products. For example, imported metalworking fluids, imported lubricants, fat liquors, but also imported PVC products, polyurethane spray foams, and paints. Assessment of the former use and presence in sealants and paints in buildings and structures. And here the inventory can be combined with PCBs and polychlorinated naphthalene former uses. Then inventory of minor exempted uses in the listing of medium chain chlorinated paraffin. I will come to the exemptions in another slide. Inventory of recycling cycles possibly impacted by SCCP and MCCP. And also here I recommend a material and substance flow analysis for these SCCP and MCCPs, possibly linking to the sectoral inventory activity. Why do I mention PCBs and PCNs in the inventory of MCCP and SCCP? The SCCP and MCCP have substituted PCBs and polychlorinated naphthalenes in the 1960s and 1970s in several open applications. So in these open applications, SCCP and MCCPs are still used in large volumes, but PCB use in these open applications have stopped. They were only from 1950s to 1975. And similar for PCNs, also the open uses were mainly from the 1980s to 1960s. And sometimes for the rubber, PCNs were used until 2000. So the remaining PCB and PCN in this open application, especially in sealants and paints in buildings, they can be assessed when you do a SCCP and MCCP assessment in these uses. Yeah. So for many industrial countries, it's still a big headache. I'm in Germany. We have a huge headache with PCBs in buildings still. They were quite expensive in these uses, so therefore the use of these paints and sealants in developing countries was relatively small. For the inventory of SCCP, MCCPs, we had a webinar with GGKP. Here is the link to that webinar. You can have a rehearsal there. In respect to the alternatives of MCCPs, this is the list of the exemptions which have been listed by decision Stockholm Convention 1210 in the last COPs. So exemptions are flexible PVC in 4 uses, adhesives and sealants in different uses, flexible elastomer foams for thermal insulation, fat liquoring of leather, metalworking fluids, and for rubbers, conveyor belts, and polymers and rubber use in repair and replacement parts. So these are major uses. And then there are a range of specific uses here, especially for military and for aerospace. Yeah, this includes also partly paints, partly coatings, and they are defined, but are, let's say, a much lower volume compared to these earlier mentioned exemptions. So with a 5-year exemption, MCCP will at least be produced and used until 2031. And metalworking fluids already have now an exemption by until 2036. Yeah. So therefore, at least until 2036, we will have them with us and we will need to manage. As third part of the action plan is on alternative assessment. Alternatives to MCCP, SCCP are assessed and used, and they are substituted by the most sustainable chemical and non-chemical solution. There is already a guidance, a preliminary draft guidance on alternative of SCCP on the Stockholm Convention website, and this guidance will be updated this year to also include the medium chain chlorinated paraffins. Recommended activity options are compilation of information on alternatives in exempted uses, including chemical and non-chemical alternatives, and what alternatives are currently available in the country. Then education and capacity building on alternative assessment, similar to the other action plan, this can go together. Selection of the most sustainable alternative in applications and promotion of the related substitutes. Then do a science-based assessment if any exemption for MCCP, SCCP is needed. For SCCP, actually, the exemption have expired. So therefore, currently in your country, SCCP should not be used, and you cannot ask for exemption for SCCP, but you can ask for exemption for MCCP. And I have confirmed with the Stockholm Convention Secretariat, you can now send an email to the BRS Secretariat and tell what kind of exemption are needed in your country, and then they will be listed later on the BRS website. So when you send this to the BRS Secretariat, you tell what kind of exemption, what is the estimated quantity, what is the purpose of the production, and what is the reason for the exemption, and then to do a periodic review of this exemption. The link to MCCP on the website is not there yet. I have copied here the link to the SCCP exemption. Then best available techniques, best environmental practice, if exempted uses are needed. The objective is here that BAT-BEP is applied for exempted production and use of MCCPs, and releases and exposure are minimized. Also there we have at the moment a guidance on BAT-BEP for the short-chain chlorinated paraffin, and the Stockholm Convention UNEP BAT-BEP group is currently updating this guidance to also include the medium-chain chlorinated paraffins. The recommended activity options are apply BAT-BEP in the production of MCCPs and implement control measures for releases and for waste management of this production. Apply BAT-BEP if MCCPs are used in the production of polymers and other products. And apply BAT-BEP also when medium chain chlorinated paraffin containing products are used in industry, for example, when metalworking fluids are used or fat liquors in leather production. It has a very high exposure risk for workers because it's a real open use, and sometimes, you know, when you use it as metalworking fluid, it's hot. Yeah, so here especially worker safety is very important and a part of BAT-BEP. Then monitoring of BAT-BEP compliance of industries by competent authorities, require labeling of chemicals, mixtures and products containing MCCPs, and manage them in the life cycle. So here, the life cycle management of SCCP, MCCP containing products, stockpiles and waste is a further part of the action plan. Here, the life cycle management of SCCP and SCCP, MCCP containing products and waste to be controlled. The recommended activity options are first, control and restrict the import of SCCP and MCCP, NCP products containing SCCP and MCCPs. So most countries in the world are not producing them. Yeah. So therefore, yes, the border control and the customs is your first line of defense against these chemicals, but it is a challenge, especially for the products which contain SCCP and MCCPs like PVC, on how to detect them because they are normally not labeled. Assess the waste management and stocks of chlorinated paraffin productions and users. Assess and stop the use of SCCP, MCCPs and the mixtures containing SCCP and MCCP above the POP limit in major industrial and other uses, including consumer products. Assess the current situation and improvement needs regarding the management of waste, including PVC, including cables, including rubber waste, including waste oil. And you have seen before, huge amount is in construction. So therefore, finally, these end up in construction and demolition waste. Yeah. And this is normally in countries the biggest waste flow of all, but normally only containing between 1 and 2% of plastics. Assessment and monitor of recycling of waste containing SCCP, MCCP, and also remaining PCBs, for example, in cables, yeah, or construction demolition waste. We still have presence of open uses of PCBs or recycling of oils. Still, some of the PCB oils end up in oil recycling, and the same SCCP and MCCP can end up in oil recycling. So also there, in at least 2 of these recycling cycles, these POP groups can be addressed together. And then finally, environmental sound management and disposal of SCCP, MCCP containing products and waste. And I can tell you that in future there will be huge challenges in big recycling streams. Yeah, one recycling stream will be PVC recycling, which will have challenges with the presence of SCCP, MCCP. Also for rubber, it will be impacted by SCCP and MCCP, the recycling. Also leather recycling or recycling of lubricants and metal working fluids in oil recycling might bring SCCP, MCCP in these recycling cycles. So therefore, for sure, this is a big area for action and activities in the implementation of for SCCP and MCCP action plan. Actually, the World Chlorine Council proposed in the POP Reviewing Committee to exempt for recycling of MCCP, but this was not considered in the recommendation of listings, finally in the Conference of Parties. And therefore, the recycling of MCCP and SCCP is not allowed. Yeah. Then education and awareness raising on SCCP, MCCP. Here, develop first awareness raising and education materials for the different stakeholders, including policymakers, industry, retail, yeah, because they are hugely in products already when they come into your countries. Then for consumers, awareness raising and education of stakeholders on POP potentially impacted products within the larger education activity on hazardous chemicals in products. Here with GFC synergy and the synergy to SDG 12 and activities you have in your country, recommend to include chemicals and hazardous chemicals there. Then capacity building and training of workers in productions where SCCP, MCCPs are produced or used, as well as to these recyclers, which I have just listed, and in waste management. Awareness raising of the public within the general awareness raising of chemicals in product and sustainable consumption. Just a few slides to raise a bit your awareness. So when we look today to the global human milk study, we see that SCCP, MCCP levels have increased in the last decades and are now already 10 times higher than the PCB levels in human milk. In a few years, today only DDT levels in average are higher, but in some countries already the chlorinated paraffins are the main POPs in human milk. Yeah. And what I need to highlight, of course, mother milk is still the best nutrition for a baby, despite these pollutants. And I have also a good news. Most other POPs have decreased in human milk in the recent decades, and the Stockholm Convention is also one reason for it. And we see that the Stockholm Convention is effective there, yeah, and especially also restriction of these chemicals is really effective. But when we look here for the chlorinated paraffins, we see especially in poorer countries in Africa and Asia, the level are highest. Yeah. So this is from Professor Fiedler, was before UNEP, then Örebro University. So she has done an assessment of the levels in human milk in respect to gross national income based on purchasing power parity. And you see that those at the lower end have higher concentrations compared to the countries at the higher end. Why? Because SCCP and MCCP are so cheap products. PVC are so cheap products. Yeah. And therefore, countries in Africa, Asia, they are using this. The chlorinated paraffins are even cheaper than normal mineral oil. Yeah, because for the normal mineral oil, you have a mineral oil tax. Yeah, while this is often missing for these chemicals. So therefore, they are frequently used in developing countries. And we see that in developing countries, these levels in human milk are increasing. You see here for Mauritius, within 10 years, between 2009 and 2018, the levels have tripled. The same for Niger, yeah, and the same for Senegal, yeah. So levels are increasing in most countries. Some countries they stay the same, but I can promise you in the next measurement 2026-7 they will be even higher. So where do they come from? One, are these what I just explained, products in buildings? Yeah, this can be seen, for example, here in house dust. House dust in Africa, here for South Africa, contain as a mean concentration 200 milligram per kilogram of SCCP and MCCP. This means you can recover the chlorinated paraffin from your house dust already, yeah, with a maximum close to 1 gram per kilogram in the house dust, yeah. And the major sources are likely releases from plastic materials in construction, PVC, polyurethane spray foam, and rubber. But also paints and coatings might contribute to this high indoor exposure. So coming to the next part in the action plan, that's analysis and monitoring. And you have seen, I hope, with this example, that without monitoring of products or recycling, it is impossible to identify contaminated products or to control imports or recycling cycles. The analysis of SCCP, MCCP, unfortunately, is quite complex and complicated. It's more complicated than, for example, the analysis of PCB. And many low and middle income countries already face challenges with the more simple PCB analysis. Yeah, but SCCP, MCCP analysis is much more complex. So the objective is here established analysis of SCCP and MCCP and monitoring of relevant priority products and matrices, and be able to control their use and to reduce and prevent exposure. Recommended activity options are: first, the assessment of options for monitoring SCCP, MCCP. Is it possible to do this with international collaboration, or should you develop a own capacity? And establish an approach to get priority samples analyzed. We had 2 very nice webinars with GGKP for Africa and for Asian countries in respect to POP research needs and research opportunities, where a range of groups from Europe, but also from China, offered to do research cooperation. And actually, we have now initiated just for Nigeria the first research cooperation between a Nigerian research group and a Chinese research group for MCCP, SCCP analysis. Improvement of inventory by monitoring tier 3. where no important knowledge gaps were identified in the inventory, and monitoring and controlling of releases from exempted processes using MCCPs, and assessing the relevant exposure of humans and contamination of the environment. This is a monitoring study from Europe. Here in Europe, we have monitored consumer products, and in Europe, we have an unintentional trace contaminant limit of 1,500 milligram of SCCP in products. And the products which we have found are above were toys like plastic dolls, toy doctor sets, bouncing toys, stickers for children, rubber knife, toilet seats, but also sports equipments, including beach ball, baseball gloves, fitness gloves, yoga mats, all-purpose mats, artificial leather, cables, baking ovens and kitchen blenders, and so on. Yeah. So you see, yes, they are in PVC and rubber, but these PVC are then finally in products like toys and sports equipment. We have a guidance, a Stockholm Convention guidance on monitoring POPs in products and recycling. And actually, I have just updated it for the BRS Secretariat together with colleagues. And we have a 2026 publication here. And in Annex 3 of the guidance documents, this contains for each POP relevant for products and recycling an analytical method for instrumental analysis. And for chlorinated paraffins, we have included 3 different analytical methods, including a low resolution method, which can also be used in low and middle income countries when you have here a GC low resolution MS. We have also included a high resolution method, which is normally used with the orbit trap method here from the laboratory, reference laboratory in Freiburg, and LC, this means liquid chromatography, MS method from the National Institute of Environmental Studies. And all are in detail described. Have a look at it when you are thinking to develop such monitoring in your country. Then on contaminated sites, last not least, here the recommended activity options are to develop update legislation to set criteria for SCCP, MCCP, contaminated soils and sediment, develop legislation on liability related to contaminated sites, polluter pays principle, within a general activity on POP contaminated sites. Then a database and a map of potentially contaminated sites along the life cycle of SCCP, MCCP production, sites of use and end-of-life treatment, and prioritization of sites for further assessment. Finally, securing contaminated sites to reduce elimination and eliminate exposure, and potentially remediating the sites in an environmentally sound manner. Life cycle stages here, this is from the inventory guidance, which I recommend you. There is a detailed inventory guidance, including 1 chapter about contaminated sites, production, use in production, and end-of-life management. Also here, the advertisement for the guidance of the Stockholm Convention from last year, developed on POPs contaminated sites, very detailed and recommendable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Roland. That was really an impressive final session with lots and lots of information. We have time for questions from the audience, and we have 2 options. One, I have questions here in the Q&A that we can use, but I would also invite the participants, if they want to pose the questions directly themselves, to put up their hands. And I actually see we already have 2 hands up. So maybe what I'll do is I'll start with that. I'll let the participants themselves maybe pose the first questions, and I'll also then take some from the Q&A if they don't ask themselves. So if I may, Liz Dahlia, would you like to ask your question of the 2 speakers? And if you unmute, you will be able to speak, Ms. Dahlia. So maybe I might wait. We will maybe move to the next one while we wait for Listalia. Andelka, you have your hand up as well. And if you unmute, you will be able to speak and ask the question of the speakers. Andelka, you had your hand raised. Would you like to pose your question? You have to just unmute yourself and you can speak. So it seems we might have a small issue with the participants posing their questions. So what we'll do is, while we see if we can come back to them, I can actually take some out of the Q&A. So there was a question posed a while back, Roland, in one of your earlier sessions. And the question was, can plastics be replaced meaningfully with bioplastics and natural materials as a starting point? Maybe you would like to address that question first.
Yeah, I mean, partly there is already the answer in the question, right? So they said yes. I mean, jute or paper, yeah, but also there is for sure a limitation in use for some of the food. You cannot just use paper because you need to, let's say, isolate it from ambient air. So yes, some of the uses can be substituted, especially with this long-term uses like jute bag and so on. But some of the uses cannot be substituted. In respect to bioplastic, yes, there is substitution potential, but there is also challenges afterwards, especially for composting. When you look into some of the bioplastic, it is possible to compost them in industrial composting facilities when you reach the right temperature. But at home, when the temperature is still low, often these plastic are not degrading, and we have always the challenge in end of life management for the waste management people to how to distinguish between a degradable plastic and a non-degradable plastic. So if we have them at large for a specific use, where you can separate them in uses, yes, but let's say they are also not the complete solution of our plastic problem, unfortunately.
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's yeah, they have the role to play, but they're not the end solution, so to speak. I'll move quickly on because to Alexander on EPR. We have a question in the Q&A where it is being asked, how can producers be legally compelled to fulfill their obligations? It's a simple question, and probably you can be answered in many different ways, but I'll let you give it a go.
Okay, so I already tried to answer the question in the chat. I will start. It's complicated, and it's at the heart of the success of the implementation of EPR. One of the key features would be an electronic register of producers and having a very good definition of who a producer is and who has to register. And then secondly, a mechanism where you can inform enforcement agencies about potential free riding. So that is one of the key recommendations we were giving in the basic principles paper. So that's a very technical response. Secondly, stakeholder dialogue is at the heart of EPR. So having a buy-in of the producers into a system is as well fundamental, and that there's an agreement in the industry that this is the right way forward. So in an ideal case, an EPR system should be economically more efficient than municipal solid waste management. So that's the idea from a, let's say, business perspective. And if there's agreement and collective action, this can be achieved. But having said that, it's a very complicated question, especially in countries where free riding on, let's say, other regulations is not unusual. You have to figure out how to do that, and I fundamentally believe a good register and a stakeholder dialogue can work. I can share as well. So there's a public register for packaging in Germany, and you can actually check any company that is registered there, and that can be even a small butchery in a state. They all have to register, and if they're not allowed to sell products on the market.
Okay. No. Yes. A question that could be answered in many ways and for a long time. But thank you very much. I see that Andelka has managed to unmute herself. Andelka, would you like to pose your question directly to Roland and Alexander? Andelka, can you hear us and maybe try pose your question? Okay, I think we might still have a problem there. But Roland, maybe coming back to you, because there's a number of questions here, I think, targeting for you. And what I'd like to do is, it actually went into the answer section, but I think it's one we could delve into a little bit more, is the fact that the general publics just lack a huge awareness about the issues with POPs, the contamination of plastic, the fact that it's in, as you said at the beginning, in everything from toys, plastic cups, etc. The reality is, no matter how much we legislate and no matter how much we regulate, without the average person having this awareness and understanding it, will we get further, or can we move ahead without focusing on public awareness and focus mostly on legislation to get this through?
No, I mean, especially when it comes to plastic and plastic products, the consumer and their separation and management of products is key. Yeah, to prevent that the chemicals are in the products, it's quite tricky for consumers. I mean, we have some tools in Europe, US, that you have an app, and this app is scanning then the barcode and tell you if this cosmetic contain this and this chemical. Yeah, so this, let's say, is working, and and it's really fun to do that. My wife and also my girl, they screened all our cosmetics. But for other products, it's difficult for the consumer, for example, for SCCP, MCCP. Yeah, but of course, the waste management, separation at source, and so on is key. You need the consumer. Yeah, also. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a remaining challenge that we need to really focus on ultimately, is how to better involve the consumer, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. There are more questions for you, Roland, but I actually want to come back to Alexander again, and it follows on to the question you answered at the very beginning after your session. And this comes back to the complexity of recycling. Okay, I mean, as you said, it's one country cannot be expected to do all of this. To what degree will EPR actually help design better products to make recycling easier in the future? I mean, again, to address the complexity of it, can we hope that EPR will actually make products simply easier to recycle and less complex in the future, or is that too far into the future to hope for?
Well, there's as well two ways to answer it. Let's call a spade, and do not expect EPR to solve all problems of sustainability. So that's really something regarding expectation management. It stems from waste management legislation, and normally the sustainability of product is regulated in the product-related regulation. So it should rather be something like eco-design regulation or packaging regulation, where you would define the recyclability, let's say, requirements for a product. Having said that, there are, let's say, countries like France that are working on eco-modulation of EPR fees, so that a product that is easier to be recycled will cost a lower EPR fee. So it is the intention to improve EPR systems in such a way, but there are as well other, let's say, legal ways to get to that result. And if the EPR system is not fully developed yet, it wouldn't be my starting point. I would rather start with getting EPR running and registering producers and make it work, and then venture into eco-modulation and try to regulate through product regulation first. But it's happening, but it's not, let's say, the case in all product types and markets.
Well, thank you. I think it's not putting all of our eggs into one basket or assuming work makes a lot of sense there, Alexander. We've actually come quite close. In fact, we're at the end of our allocated time. So what I would like to do actually is we will be answering all of the still open questions by email, reaching so that everybody gets their answers also recorded and their questions, should I say, recorded and answered. But maybe I could turn to both you, Roland, and Alexander, if you want to maybe sum up your intervention today and to leave the audience with a closing remark in 30, 60 seconds each, so that they have a nice summary to take home with them. Roland, would you like to go first?
No, not a summary, but I think what we have seen today with the action plan for the different sectors is that they can really help to drive the management also of large plastic in sectors, and by this, at the time where we don't have a plastic treaty, which will take some more time, take over this task, and also by coming from single POPs to chemical groups like brominated flame retardants, and regulate aromatic brominated flame retardants, for example, or looking also to phosphorus flame retardants and the problems there, looking here to the European Union approaches and to the documents, and possibly considering and making bigger steps than only regulate single POPs, but to see really here the chance of an integrated approach, and together with Alexander, then also about the financing and improvement of waste management in this sector, which is so urgently needed when we see in what situation our oceans, but also our dump sites and landfills are.
Thank you, Roland. Over to you, Alexander.
So I would like to end on a positive note, and we've seen let's say in the waste management or EPR space that change is possible. So there are a couple of countries who have started, as well outside of Europe, have started implementing EPR policies and achieved remarkable successes. You can look at, for example, Colombia, where the EPR scheme is working a lot better. Chile is another case studies. We see other very interesting approaches in Kenya that are, let's say, developing, and it is really possible, and it requires collective action, and it's really rather about doing. So the conceptual work has been done. It's really about implementing it and implementing it jointly. And if we can contribute to that as the GEF for EPR, I'm very happy to contribute, and do not hesitate to reach out if you have more questions.
So thank you both again very, very much. It's been really appreciated. Definitely a very, very interesting webinar with your insights. And of course, to the participants, you will all be getting a link to the recording and the summary of this. Also a thanks to Katarzyna, who is no longer there, but also for her opening remarks as well. In the last few moments, left to us, I would like to use the opportunity to also mention the NIPS community of practice on the Green Forum. Sumin has actually added a link in the chat to this. It would be great if you would consider joining that community of practice, as it's a way to share how it's going in your country, and of course to hear from those who have already successfully developed action plans and maybe move forward to the next steps. Finally, do please remember that this webinar is only the third of a series, and coming soon we will have the fourth webinar, details of which will be shared with you very soon. And in the meantime, we also have a different webinar on the 30th of January called Making Data Work, Applying GMP and POPs Inventories for Evidence-Based Policy in NIPS. And yes, Sumin has actually just dropped the registration link for that webinar in the chat for you as well. So with that, our time is up. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you again, Alexander and Roland, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Hannes. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.